I didn't say a word when the HOA president screamed about unauthorized construction. I just laid the folded deed on the table, right between her coffee cup and her trembling hand. The seal of the county registrar glinted under the fluorescent light, and her face shifted from anger to a kind of stunned confusion that only happens when someone realizes they've been living on borrowed power. You can't own the street," she stammered. I didn't answer. The title said otherwise. 2 years earlier, I wouldn't have believed I'd end up sitting across from that same woman, in the same sterile clubhouse, holding the paperwork that would unravel her entire little empire. Back then, all I wanted was peace. A place to retire, fix up my workshop, and stop waking up to the sound of deadlines instead of birds. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with identical homes and manicured lawns. It seemed to hum in perfect suburban harmony. The street, Birch Hollow Drive, curved like a lazy question mark through the development. I bought the last house at the end, a corner lot with a cracked driveway and an old oak that shaded half the roof. I liked that driveway. It wasn't pretty old concrete, a few oil stains from the previous owner's truck, but it was wide enough for my trailer, and the slope made it easy to wash down. When I moved in, I planned to resurface it myself. Nothing fancy, just a new layer of pavers to match the walkway. It was supposed to be a weekend project, something satisfying to mark the start of my retirement. The first letter arrived 3 days after the pallets of pavers were delivered. A crisp white envelope tucked under my door, printed with a logo that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought clip art was a personality. Violation notice, it said in bold at the top. Apparently, resurfacing my own driveway without prior design approval was against HOA guidelines. The fine was $150. I thought it was a mistake. Surely they didn't mean that driveway. My property line was clearly marked on the purchase documents, and the HOA covenants had no mention of driveway modifications requiring permission. I figured I'd call, clear it up, maybe even laugh about it later. But when I reached the president, a woman named Carol who sounded like she wore pearls to bed, she informed me that all external modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee, and that I'd receive further penalties if I didn't comply. I hadn't even laid the first paver. At first, I played along. I filled out the form she sent me, submitted a driveway renovation request, and attached photos of the materials. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. Denied. The reason? Inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic that was reach, considering half the driveways on Birch Hollow were cracked, mismatched, or spray-stained from overzealous pressure washers. Primera triade again, polite email. Copy of the deed attached. Even quoted the HOA bylaws that clearly stated maintenance was the homeowner's responsibility. Carol replied, with a single line. You agreed to abide by HOA decisions upon purchase. That's when I stopped emailing and started reading. It began as mild curiosity. I pulled my property documents again, looked at the plot map, the easements, the right-of-way language. Something caught my attention. The street name was printed faintly on the map, but the boundary lines didn't quite line up with the development's plat. The street, Birch Hollow Drive, extended about 20 feet past what was listed as HOA-managed property. My driveway started on that section. Technically, the first 8 feet of what they called my driveway was Sante, even on HOA land. It was part of a public easement owned by the county. He went deeper. The county records office had digitized archives going back to the 1970s, when the land was subdivided. I spent 3 late nights reading old plat maps until my eyes hurt. That's when I noticed something the HOA never had. Birch Hollow Drive wasn't fully deeded to the association. The developer had gone bankrupt mid-project, and while the HOA eventually took over maintenance, they never finalized the title transfer. The county still held partial ownership of the main roadway and the rest. The undeeded section, including my end of the street, was technically listed as unincorporated private access, which meant anyone could apply to buy it. That's when my attitude changed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Over the next 2 months, I quietly documented everything. Every letter, every fine, every ridiculous reminder that arrived on pastel, stationery like some kind of suburban ransom note. They fined me for parking my trailer, for having non-conforming mailbox paint, even for leaving my trash cans out overnight after pickup. It was clear they were trying to squeeze me out. Neighbors stopped waving. One man I used to chat with, while mowing, suddenly crossed the street to avoid eye contact. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I called the county assessor's office and requested a meeting. I explained the situation, left out the petty drama, focused on the unclaimed land. The assessor confirmed it. The lowest stretch of Birch Hollow Drive, about 0.4 acres total, had never been properly deed. It was legally available for purchase as a private road, subject to right of access agreements. The price, $8,000 plus filing fees. I didn't even blink. I filed the application that afternoon. It took nearly 4 months for the process to grind through the county system. During that time, the HOA kept pushing. Carol sent me 3 violation notices, 2 final warnings, and 1 certified letter threatening legal action. I paid none of it. Instead, I had my lawyer draft a simple response citing County Zoning Code 18.42/060, the provision outlining jurisdiction limits for HOAs built on mixed ownership land. I doubt she even read it. The deed transfer came through on a Tuesday morning in September. I signed it at the county recorder's office, notarized and stamped. Who's like that? I owned the bottom half of Birch Hollow Drive, from the intersection to my property line. That included the section directly in front of Carol's house. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to be thorough. I had a surveyor mark the boundaries and filed a limited public access notice with the county, effectively turning the stretch into a privately maintained road with conditional use. It didn't change much on paper, but legally, it stripped the HOA of authority to enforce any rules on that section. 2 weeks later, they held their monthly meeting. I showed up. First time since moving in. Carol tried to pretend she didn't see me as I took a seat in the back. Half the board was there, sipping coffee and flipping through agendas about community uniformity and driveway appearance enforcement. When the topic came up, Carol announced that I owed $1,500 in accumulated fines and would be subject to lien proceedings if unpaid. That's when I set the folder on the table. Inside was the recorded deed, the purchase receipt, and a certified letter from the county confirming the jurisdictional change. You might want to call your attorney before you file that lien, I said quietly. You no longer have enforcement rights on that section of Birch Hollow Drive. The room went silent. One of the board members, a retired accountant, leaned over the document and squinted. Is this real? He asked. Carol didn't answer. Her face was red, but her voice was shaking when she finally said, You can't just buy a street. I smiled. You can when no one else legally owns it. The fallout took months. The HOA tried to challenge the purchase, but the county's own paperwork buried them. They'd failed to assume the road in the original plat filing, which meant their jurisdiction ended where my deed began. The association's insurance company refused to cover the legal costs, citing mismanagement of authority. By spring, 3 board members had resigned. Carol stepped down for personal reasons. I never resurfaced the driveway. I didn't need to. I poured a simple concrete extension that connected seamlessly to the private road. My road. The HOA hasn't sent me a single notice since. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evenings, I watch the same people who used to glare at me drive slowly past the private access authorized use only sign. Some wave, most don't. I don't care. The street is quiet. The air feels clean. And every time I see the glint of the metal street sign I paid to replace Birch Hollow Drive private, I remember the day they fined me for fixing my own driveway. Funny thing is, I never did finish that project. Instead, I fixed something much bigger. Now, they drive on it every day.